Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to PZP, Pokemon Zoology, episode 7. It's actually crazy that I'm at number 7 already. Literally feels like the other day that I started this. But yeah, I hope you're all doing well. But yeah, basically this month, I've got 3 new Pokemon done. Farfetchd, Voltorb, and Electrode. These were all really interesting Pokemon to do. Farfetchd, well, as I've said many, many times on this podcast, I hate doing feathers. So I wasn't really looking forward to doing Farfetchd. But, you know, it ended up looking pretty good, and I was quite happy with it. And a lot of people seem to like it. So, you know, that's what more can I ask for? Yeah, so let's dive into it, and I'll just quickly talk about each one. So as I said, Farfetchd, covered in feathers, not a fan. But for me, it was trying to get something that was natural without looking too cliche or cartoony. It's easy, if you have a Pokemon that is kind of like very stylized in its eyes and whatnot, a lot of people, they're like, oh no, well, it should look angry or it should look this way and blah, blah, blah. But conventionally, I don't really like to do that. Like, I don't really want always to kind of make it look the way that people expect it to. I want it to look like a natural animal. So, ducks in themselves aren't super expressive. So I try to kind of like bring that into, or try and find like a healthy balance between the two. And I think I've done that. I think I've got a really nice in between or middle ground with the two. The feathers ended up turning out pretty good. They were, still not perfect, but it's all a learning process. And I had to do quite a lot in Photoshop in terms of like making the feathers feel a little bit more like feathers, because as I've said before, feathers are very, very difficult for a number of reasons, but one of the main reasons is that the way that light passes through them and scatters is something that's really hard to replicate in a renderer unless you go through and kind of individually sculpt the feathers. And quite frankly, that's just not something that I'm willing to do. It's an element of like, if I was creating a model for a fully animated series or something like that, or well, not even necessarily a fully animated series, but something like his Dark Materials, for example, the feathers on like the hawks and whatnot are beautiful in that, and you can see that they have gone through and they've created like individual feathers, and they've made sure that the light is passing through it properly and stuff, because you're going to be looking at it from all different angles in a number of different types of light, and they need to look realistic throughout, whereas I'm making models that are for concept art. They are specifically for that, therefore I have a little bit more leeway and I have a little bit more flexibility in what I'm doing. So especially is the fact that I can take it into Photoshop and I can bring in photos of like real feathers, I can force light, giving harsh reflections where there aren't harsh reflections, that kind of stuff, just to kind of like make it feel more realistic. And again, this is another reason why I don't give out my models to animators and what like that, because I think people have a false expectation of what they would be receiving, because the model is just a base, and I do a lot of work in post. Yeah, if you are an animator and you wanted to message me and ask me to use my models, they're not going to look like proper models. I'm just giving you a heads up. But yeah, overall, very happy with Farfetchd. I don't think I need to do more to it. One last thing that I'll say about Farfetchd is that I did add in some kind of extra feathers that kind of act more like thumbs, I guess is the best way of describing it, because in the anime the feathers, like the tips of the feathers wrap round and hold the leek, but it can still fly, which is just not possible. Like physics is the answer to that. Pokemon is a stickler for completely ignoring physics in their work, but considering that I'm making a more realistic version of it, I wanted to, try and figure out a way of it being able to hold this leek without it being really odd. Technically, holding the feather even like this is impossible, but it is somewhat more believable than the tips of the feather wings, tips of the feathers fully wrapping around. So sometimes I kind of have to come up with these very insane solutions to certain things, but I think it worked. People liked it, so I can't complain. Next we have Voltorb. I have been sitting on this one for a while, not because I was worried about it or anything like that. I know I do say, I struggle with hard surface materials, and I do. That's not a lie. That is something that I struggle with. But this one is relatively simple. But I actually made a design for Voltorb a long time ago that I was really happy with. I don't know, I guess it was something that, some Pokemon I just kind of want to hold off on because it gives me something to look forward to. And this was one of them. It was just kind of one of the ones that I just kind of sat on and was like, yeah, one day I'm going to do a Voltorb and it's going to be really cool. And I'd also kind of worked out the story. I mean, if you go back and read the story, and actually if you are a Patreon supporter, you can read the far more extended story that I've done, which goes into a lot more depth. But I wanted there to be a kind of a story behind the artificial Pokemon, like Magnemite and stuff like that. But Voltorb, I was trying to figure out something that kind of gave an explanation of why they explode and all of this kind of stuff. So the idea of having this kind of designed artificial intelligence bomb that could sneak into areas and explode, get drained, but then essentially recover and be able to come back out of a war zone and kind of escape, really appealed to me. I thought that was such a cool idea, and decided that's what I was going to develop. And I also wanted Voltorb to look kind of rough around the edges, like it has been beaten and battered, and that it was quite crude in its design, because also there's the idea that they can replicate. And I kind of wanted that to be an element that their design is crude because they almost kind of rush their replication. So the eyes were just kind of weld cut out holes essentially for its sensors to be able to kind of read outside of its hard metal shell. And yeah, I mean, I originally had this idea of that Voltorb could fully unfold and explode and then refold, but the more I kind of created it in 3D, the more it didn't really kind of make sense, and the lines were a bit distracting, so I removed them in the end. And yeah, just kind of had this idea that rather than it exploding, unfolding and exploding, that it just kind of lifts up and that the explosion comes out from the gap in between the two sections. And yeah, and I was really happy with it. I mean, if you watch the time-lapse video, one of the main issues with the picture that I had was the electrical sparks coming off it. I knew I definitely wanted to have electrical sparks on it because it makes it look that much more threatening. But the more I drew it, the more distracting they were. It completely threw off the composition of the picture. So I ended up going for far finer electrical sparks, which some people, in the comments were like, oh, I think you should punch those up. But it's easy for people to kind of say, oh, I think that should be changed without actually seeing what it looks like when it's changed, because realistically it just wasn't going to work. It was just too strong. I did go for slightly stronger ones on Electrode, but that in my head made a little bit more sense because it was more powerful. So, the composition on Electrode was still a bit iffy, but, gotta do what you gotta do. But again, overall, Voltorb, very, very happy with. I thought it kind of came across really menacing. It had a really unique take. Yes, I removed the white eyes. I do that with all of my mechanical Pokemon because I think it would just look stupid. Okay, not stupid, just unrealistic. It just wouldn't feel grounded, and it would feel cartoony. Which is not what I want to do. And I think that's, a few people have said to me, hey, what do you think of the Detective Pikachu Pokemon? And I think that they did a fabulous job. I think texture-wise they look great, and I completely understand the reason why they've done certain designs in the way that they've done. But to me, they feel like really highly rendered versions of the cartoons, which in terms of a marketing sense, makes total sense. You know, like you want your brand to look like the rest of your brand, and you've also got a huge fan base, and it is easier to try and stay closer to the original source than it is to kind of reinvent it and to kind of possibly have this backlash. I mean, like, look at what happened with Sonic. Like, yeah, and you don't want to have that with something as big as Pokemon, but it doesn't feel real to me. It feels like they are cartoons, and so that when in my work, I'm trying to get away from that and go, okay, well, you know, that's the official stuff. Fantastic. You know, people love it. That's great. Here's my interpretation of it as if it were real, and also kind of directed more at an older audience, which I think, you know, is why that there is an appeal with my work for some people. I know it's not for everyone, and that's fine. Art is subjective. It's just the way the world works. And, you know, I get people who message me going like, what have you done to my favourite Pokemon? I'm like, you don't have to look at my work. Like, you don't have to follow me. Like, it's fine. Like, this is my interpretation. This isn't canon. My work is not the prequels of Star Wars. So chill. Anyway, moving on to Electrode. So Electrode was a little bit more tricky because obviously I had certain elements I could play with Voltorb. But the main problems that I had with Electrode, and something that I was trying to play with, so it has the mouth for one, and it also has like these tiny little dot eyes and really large, thin eyebrows that kind of look like painted on Eastern European ladies' eyebrows. No offense to the Eastern Europeans out there, but I think you get what I'm saying. So when I kind of approached this, I was just like, okay, right, well, how am I going to do this? Because I can't give it a mouth. The first thing that popped into my head was a vent, and it just made total sense to me. That was a given. When it came to the eyes, I originally tried, I was just like, okay, well, it does have kind of like dot eyes. It doesn't have like these big eyes that like Voltorb does. So I tried doing these dots, and it looked silly. It looked like a smiley face, like emoji, and yeah, that wasn't going to work. It needed to look menacing. So I decided to go with the original eyes, because again, there needs to be consistency, especially when it's evolving from one thing to another. Like, why would it evolve and then make smaller eye ports? It just doesn't make any sense. So I did that, and I originally made the lights inside his eyes like smaller lines rather than the circles in Voltorb's, but it didn't really feel right. It wasn't kind of giving off the right vibe. So I put in the circles as well, and that just, with the lines as well, it kind of gave it a really, like, a more unique thing, but also recognisable to the original. So yeah, so I was really happy with that. But then it was the eyebrows that I had to kind of really think about and be like, okay, well, how are the eyebrows going to work? Because they are a feature, you know. This is a very featureless Pokemon, therefore the eyebrows become a very important feature. So yeah, I came up with this idea that it has these blast doors that shut when it goes to explode, keeping the inside of it protected, essentially, especially as it has a much larger explosive range. Therefore, it kind of makes sense that it would need to kind of protect itself a little bit more. Again, if you're a Patreon supporter, you'll know that I wrote almost like 2 pages worth of backstory for this guy. There's the main kind of like elements of its function that I posted on social media, but then I wrote a whole other story about the lead character that I always write in my stories, being called in because the police department find an Electrode in the basement of a prestigious building that is hosting like peace talks, and it's very clear that it wasn't placed there by accident, and the protagonist has to go in and essentially disarm a bomb. So that was a lot of fun to write, and I think, you know, my patrons really enjoyed the story as well. So yeah, so if you do want to become a Patreon supporter, you can actually check that out. It's like the lowest one is $5 a month, and you know, you get all of these stories. I write these chapters for stories. I write extra story development into all of my pictures. You get to see some behind the scenes stuff of like development work sometimes, depending on, you know, how busy I am and whatnot. You can be part of the Discord, so, people can chat on Discord. Yeah, it's you get a lot more for your money, essentially. And, if you go for any of the higher tiers, I also send out posters and other things like that. So do check it out if you're interested. But yeah, I mean, Electrode was a challenging one, but I was really happy with the result. It was one that I hadn't thought about before, so when I came to it, I was like, oh no, okay, gotta think about this one hard. But yeah, everyone was really happy with it, so I can't complain. So, moving on, we've got some Q&A questions to go through, as always. So, the first question comes from the Global Gringo, and they say, what are your plans for the book? If you don't know, I have plans to, once I finish the first 150, I have about 33, 34, something like that left to do, which is kind of crazy. It's been years of doing this, and, I'm coming to the end. But yeah, so basically my plan is I'm going to do a Kickstarter after I finish, and create a book, depending on how much information I end up putting into this book, because I do get carried away. And I know some of you have been like, put as much information as you can. But it depends. So I might be able to trim it down so it's all in one book. It'll still probably be quite a thick book. Remember, it's 150 Pokemon with all the information as well. But what might end up happening is that I'd have to kind of split it into a series of books, maybe 3 or something like that, so that I can actually put the amount of information that I really want to into the books, and the amount of information that they deserve as well. So yeah, so I'm going to do that, and I think what I want to do is kind of just have some more factual stuff about the Pokemon, elaborating on some of the stuff that I've talked about in the mini stories. So yeah, I think you guys will really enjoy it. Obviously I have to do a Kickstarter because I could never afford to do it otherwise, and it's always kind of been a bit of a dream of mine to kind of publish a book. So yeah, I think it would be really cool. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think you'd love to see in the book. So feel free to kind of message me or put your thoughts in the comments. And yeah, obviously I don't know when that will be. I don't know how long it's going to take. My original plan of doing the website has kind of been put on hold for a bit, just because I've got other projects going on, like Pangea, and then I have obviously freelance work between that. So yeah, so the book seems like the most sensible thing to focus on at the moment. Next question comes from Alyssa Day 24. Would I ever do tutorials? Yes, that is a plan that I plan to do eventually. I don't know when. It's when I have time. Tutorials actually take a really long time because, it's all in real time. So yeah, so I will get to it. I promise I will get to it, and I'll do some stuff for you guys. But don't hold your breath right now. And then the next question I've got here, or the final question I've got here, is from Dewfield151. Would you ever collaborate with other artists? Short answer is yes. Long answer is I don't really know in what capacity. I think when I was originally focusing on doing a website, I was happy with the idea of bringing in sound artists, bringing in composers to write unique soundtracks to go with different areas and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I was happy to kind of bring in lots of people, especially one of the main thing being environment artists, because that's not really my strength, and even possibly prop artists. Now, just doing the book, I don't know how I would bring that in. I think possibly if I did I have thought about the idea of possibly doing another book after I do the initial one, that will be focusing more on the Pokemon world and the history, or at least my version of it, which would involve artwork of all of the towns in Kanto, artwork of the props like the Pokeball, maybe how breaking it down, how it works. I don't know if any of you have actually seen it, but there is a number of books from the Star Wars universe which does this, where they really break it down and show you how a lightsaber works, or how warp technology could possibly work, all of this kind of stuff. So yeah, so that's kind of what I was thinking about doing. I have a few artists in mind who are very good friends of mine who would be fantastic at it. But again, I think it would require another Kickstarter and a bit more time to kind of focus on it. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes and what happens. I think if I do a website, which is still on the table, it's still something that I would love to do, it will probably come after the book and just kind of transfer a lot of the information that I've written for the book into the website, but make it far more interactive. But obviously I've been chasing that dream for quite a long time, and I've come to a lot of roadblocks, especially with money and stuff like that, because, you know, it's not easy to kind of fund these things. But, you know, we never say never. Never say never. And finally, so I just want to do a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters who are, you know, supporting me from $10 and up. And if you want to also support me, then that would be fantastic. And you also get your name in the shout out of the podcast. So we've got Bridget D Laurent, we've got Sturla, Sam Simmons, Nikki Wolf, James Dunbar, and Elvis Ditto. So thank you to all of you guys and everyone who supports me on Patreon. I really, really appreciate your support. It's amazing. So that is the end of the podcast. Thank you all for listening. I will be doing more Pokemon. The next one is Tangela, or Tangela, or however you want to pronounce it, which is gonna be a challenge. It's gonna be a challenge, but I'm excited for it. I think it's gonna be fun. I actually really enjoy doing the more unique and weird Pokemon because I get to have a lot more creative freedom with them. So I'm looking forward to it. Keep watching, keep up to date, tell your friends, and I'll see you next time. Much love, keep safe, see you next time. Bye guys.